They said she was dangerous, but no one ever told him danger could look like a woman standing still in the middle of open land, waiting, not running, not hiding, just waiting. And that was the first thing Ethan Cole noticed as he reined his horse to a slow stop about 30 feet away, the leather creaking under him, the wind dragging fine dust across the ground between them like a line neither had crossed yet, the sun hanging low enough to stretch their shadows long and thin, hers unmoving, his shifting with the restless weight of a man used to making quick decisions. And for a moment neither of them spoke, because out here words were often the first mistake. And then she lifted her chin just slightly, her dark eyes locking onto his with a steadiness that felt heavier than any weapon he carried. And she said it, quiet but clear enough to cut through the wind. Don't touch me. Not a plea, not fear, just a boundary drawn as real as the dirt under their boots. And Ethan felt his hand settle against the grip of his revolver out of instinct, not intention, the kind of instinct that had kept him alive across miles of unforgiving land where hesitation could cost everything. But something about the way she stood there, shoulders squared, breathing slow, not backing away even an inch, made that instinct feel wrong for the first time in a long while. Because he had seen fear before, seen people fold, seen them beg or bolt or break. But she did none of that. She simply stood, as if whatever came next was already decided, and she would meet it on her feet, and the silence between them stretched, thick and unmoving, broken only by the distant cry of a hawk circling somewhere high above. And Ethan became aware of the small details, the dust caught in the folds of her dress, the faint mark along her arm where the fabric had torn earlier, the way her fingers hovered near but not on anything that could be used as a weapon. And he realized she wasn't preparing to fight, she was preparing to endure. And that landed heavier than any threat could have, because it forced him to look at himself not as a man hunting something dangerous, but as the very thing she had already decided he might be. And his grip tightened just slightly before it loosened again, a slow shift that felt almost unfamiliar, like turning away from a road he had walked too many times to count. And the wind picked up just enough to stir the dust again, brushing against his boots, then hers. But still she didn't move, didn't retreat, didn't repeat her words, because she didn't need to. And Ethan let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding, the tension in his shoulders easing just enough for the barrel of his gun to dip, not dramatically, not all at once, but inch by inch until it pointed toward the ground instead of her. And for a brief second nothing changed. The world didn't shift, the wind didn't stop. She didn't suddenly trust him, but something quieter settled into the space between them, something neither of them named. And then, just as that fragile stillness took hold, a sound carried over the ridge behind him, faint at first, but growing clearer with each passing second, the unmistakable rhythm of multiple horses moving fast across dry ground. And Ethan's head turned slightly toward the noise while her eyes stayed fixed on him. And in that moment it became clear that whatever choice he had just made was about to be tested by men who hadn't made the same one. The sound of hooves carried closer now, no longer distant, no longer uncertain. A steady rhythm rolling over the ridge like a storm that had already decided where it would land. And Ethan did not need to turn fully to know there were more than one rider, maybe 3, maybe 5, the kind of number that never traveled without purpose. And he could feel it in the way the air shifted, the way the silence between him and the woman changed from something fragile into something watched, measured, waiting to be broken by someone else's choice. And still she did not move, her eyes fixed on him as if whatever came next depended not on the riders, but on him, on whether the man who had lowered his gun a moment ago would remain that man when things became harder. And Ethan let his hand fall away from the grip entirely now, letting it hang loose at his side. A small motion, but one that carried weight. Because out here a man's hands told the truth long before his words ever could. And he spoke then, his voice low, steady, not raised to meet the approaching noise, just enough to reach her. You should step back. Not an order, not a command, just a suggestion offered into the space between them. And she watched him for a long second before shifting her weight slightly, not retreating far, just enough to place a few more feet of distance between them. Enough to show she understood, but would not run. And that small movement said more than any agreement could have, because it was not trust, not yet, but it was not rejection either. and the riders came into view over the ridge, silhouettes first against the pale sky, then shapes, then men, dust trailing behind their horses as they slowed just enough to take in the scene below, and Ethan recognized the type immediately, not from their faces but from the way they carried themselves. Confident in numbers, confident in assumption, men who believed they already knew what they were looking at before they ever asked a question. And one of them leaned forward in his saddle, scanning the space between Ethan and the woman, his gaze sharp, searching for a story that fit what he expected, and Ethan felt the familiar pull again, the old instinct to align, to stand where it was easier, where no one questioned which side you were on. But he did not move, did not step toward them, did not step away from her. He simply stood where he was, between, not as a barrier, not as a shield, just present in a place that forced a choice. And the wind shifted again, carrying the scent of leather and dust, and something else, something quieter, the kind of stillness that settles before words are spoken that cannot be taken back. And Ethan kept his eyes forward, not on the men, not fully on her, but somewhere between, as if holding that space mattered more than anything else. And for the first time since the sound of hooves had reached them, the woman's gaze flickered, just for a moment, toward the approaching riders, then back to him. And there was something different there now, something that had not been there before, not fear, not yet trust, but recognition, the beginning of a question she had not decided how to ask, and Ethan did not answer it, not with words, not with movement. He only remained exactly where he had chosen to stand, as the distance between all of them closed, and the moment stretched thin enough that even the smallest action could change everything. The riders slowed as they reached the edge of the flat, their horses stamping lightly against the dry earth, dust curling around their boots as they took in the scene. Before them, 3 men, all carrying the kind of confidence that came from believing they were already in control, and the one in front tilted his head slightly, studying Ethan first, then the woman behind him, as if arranging the pieces into a story that made sense to him. And Ethan could feel the weight of that assumption before a single word was spoken, the quiet pressure to explain, to justify, to choose a side that would make everything simple again. But nothing about this moment was simple anymore, and he did not move, not forward, not back, just standing where he had placed himself, his boots set firm in the dirt, his hands open at his sides. And the lead rider finally spoke, his voice carrying easily across the space, calm but edged with something that expected an answer. "You find her." And the question hung there, not really a question, more like a conclusion waiting to be confirmed. And Ethan felt the old reflex rise again, the easy path. Say yes, step aside, let the moment resolve itself the way moments like this always had. But something in the stillness behind him held him in place, something in the quiet presence of the woman who had not run, who had not begged, who had simply drawn her line and stood by it. And he answered without turning, his voice steady. "I found someone." Not the answer they expected, not the answer they wanted, just enough truth to hold the ground he stood on. And the men shifted slightly in their saddles, glancing at each other, the smallest crack forming in their certainty, because uncertainty was not something they were used to meeting out here, not from someone who looked like Ethan Cole, not from a man who knew how things worked. And the second rider leaned forward, narrowing his eyes, trying to read what was not being said, and Ethan could feel that scrutiny like heat on his back. But he did not flinch, did not reach for his weapon, did not step aside. And behind him, the woman remained where she was, close enough that he could sense her presence, far enough that she did not depend on him. And for a brief moment the wind picked up again, tugging at coats and loose fabric, carrying the faint sound of distant open land that did not belong to any of them. And in that space, something shifted, not loud, not obvious, but real, the balance of the moment tipping not because of force, but because of refusal, because Ethan had chosen not to move in the way they expected. And the lead rider studied him a second longer, then let out a slow breath, the kind a man takes when a situation does not fit the story he brought with him. And he adjusted slightly in the saddle, his posture changing just enough to show he was reconsidering. And Ethan did not press it, did not push, did not claim anything more than what he had already done. He simply stood there, holding that narrow strip of ground between them all. And for the first time since the riders appeared, the moment did not feel like it was about to break. It felt like it was waiting, like something unseen was deciding which way it would turn, and the woman behind him took a single step. Not forward, not away, just enough to stand where she could be seen. Clearly now, her presence no longer hidden behind him, and the riders noticed, their attention shifting, their expressions tightening slightly as they took in her stance, her stillness, the way she did not shrink under their gaze. And Ethan remained exactly where he was, not blocking her, not shielding her, just refusing to leave that space empty. And in that quiet standoff, with the sun dipping lower and the shadows stretching longer across the ground, it became clear that whatever happened next would not be decided by who had the faster hand, but by who was willing to stand without one. The silence did not break. It shifted, bending under the weight of men who were no longer certain of the ground they stood on, and the lead rider's eyes moved again, slower this time, from Ethan to the woman, then back, as if recalculating something that no longer added up the way he expected, and he spoke again, but the edge in his voice had dulled just enough to notice. That is her. Not a question now, but not as solid as before either, more like a statement testing its own strength, and Ethan did not answer right away. Not because he did not hear, but because he understood that what he said next would shape everything that followed, not just for him, but for her, for the men watching, for the quiet piece of land holding them all in place. And he let a breath settle in his chest before speaking. That is a person. And the words landed differently than anything else that had been said so far. Simple, almost too simple, but heavy in a way none of them could ignore, and one of the riders shifted in his saddle. A small movement that betrayed discomfort, because out here things were easier when they were named as something less, something easier to handle, something that did not look back at you with steady eyes and make you question what you were about to do. And the wind brushed through again, lifting a strand of the woman's hair, carrying it across her face before it fell back into place. And still she did not speak, did not step forward, did not hide. She simply stood where she had chosen to stand. And Ethan could feel her presence like a quiet anchor behind him, not pulling him, not guiding him, just there, real and undeniable. And the lead rider leaned back slightly, his gaze narrowing, not in anger, but in thought, as if trying to understand why this moment refused to follow the path he had already decided for it. And Ethan remained still, not pressing, not challenging, just holding the line he had drawn without ever marking it in the dirt. And for a long second nothing happened. The kind of second that stretches long enough for a man to reconsider everything he thought he knew. And then the second rider spoke, his voice lower, less certain than before. We were told she would not come willingly. And Ethan let that sit in the air before answering. Maybe. No one asked her the right way. And that was not a challenge, not a correction, just a truth offered without force. And it hung there, changing the shape of the moment again, because it introduced something none of them had prepared for. The idea that this was not about taking or finding or claiming, but about asking, about listening, about recognizing that the person standing in front of them had a say in what happened next. And that idea moved through the space like a quiet ripple, unsettling in its simplicity. And the lead rider looked at the woman again, really looked this time, not as a task, not as an object, but as someone standing her ground. And something in his posture shifted, not surrender, not agreement, just a pause where there had been none before. And Ethan did not fill that pause, did not rush it, because he knew that moments like this could not be forced. They either held or they broke. And forcing them only led back to the same old endings. And behind him, the woman took a slow breath, her shoulders rising and falling in a rhythm that matched the steady calm she had carried from the beginning. And when she finally moved, it was only a small step forward, just enough to stand fully in the open, her voice quiet but clear as it reached the men, not raised, not sharp, just certain. And in that moment, before she even spoke the next word, it became clear that the choice was no longer theirs alone to make. Her voice did not rise, did not demand attention, and yet every man there heard it as clearly as if it had been spoken right beside them. I am not going with you. And the words settled into the space like something already decided, something that did not need to be argued or defended. And for a moment no one answered, not because they did not have words, but because none of the words they were used to using seemed to fit anymore. And Ethan felt that shift as surely as he felt the ground under his boots. The moment no longer balanced on assumption but on choice. Her choice, spoken plain and steady, and he did not turn to look at her, did not need to, because he had already seen that certainty in her eyes before she ever said it. And the lead rider exhaled slowly, his fingers resting against the saddle horn as he studied her again. Not the way a man studies something he plans to take, but the way a man studies something he cannot quite control, and that difference, small as it was, changed everything. And the second rider shifted again, less certain now, his earlier confidence thinning as the silence stretched, and he glanced toward Ethan as if expecting him to correct it, to step in, to restore the order they understood. But Ethan did not move, did not speak, did not claim authority over what had just been said, because it was not his to claim, and that absence, that refusal to take control, left the moment open in a way none of them were prepared for. And the wind moved through again, softer now, carrying the dry scent of the land that belonged to no one standing there. And the woman took another breath, slow and even, her shoulders steady, her stance unchanged, and there was no fear in it, no hesitation, just the quiet strength of someone who had already decided where she stood long before anyone else arrived. And the lead rider finally shifted in his saddle, not forward, not back, just enough to show he was weighing something heavier than before. And when he spoke, his voice had lost the certainty it carried earlier. You understand what that means? Not a threat, not exactly. More like a reminder offered into the air, and she met it without flinching, her gaze steady. I understand. And that was all. No explanation, no justification, just the same quiet certainty that had held from the beginning. And Ethan felt something settle in that exchange, something that did not need his voice, did not need his action, just his presence. And he remained where he was, not as a shield, not as a barrier, but as a witness to a choice being made without force. And the riders exchanged another look, brief but telling, because whatever they had expected when they rode over that ridge, it had not been this, not this stillness, not this refusal to bend, not this man standing between them without raising a hand or a weapon. And the moment stretched again, long enough for the sun to dip lower, casting longer shadows across the ground, long enough for the dust to settle around their boots, long enough for each of them to feel the weight of what came next. And Ethan knew, without needing to look, that this was the edge of something, not the end, not yet, but the place where the story could turn in ways none of them had planned. And all it would take was one man deciding to ignore what had just been spoken, one man choosing the old way instead of this new, uncertain ground. And as that thought settled, the lead rider's gaze hardened just slightly, not with anger, but with decision, and he leaned forward in his saddle a fraction, enough to signal that whatever came next would not be as simple as walking away. The shift was small, almost invisible, but Ethan saw it the same way a man sees a storm change direction before the clouds move. The way the lead rider leaned forward just enough to show that thinking had ended and decision had begun, and the air tightened again, not with noise, not with movement, but with expectation, the kind that builds when someone is about to step back into the old way of doing things, the way that did not ask, did not listen, did not leave room for anyone else to choose. And Ethan felt that pull again, stronger now, because this was the moment where most men returned to what they knew, where hesitation was replaced by certainty, where silence was filled with action. But he did not move, not yet. And behind him, the woman remained steady, her presence unchanged, her choice already spoken and not taken back. And the lead rider's voice came again, lower this time, more deliberate. We did not ride out here for nothing. And the words carried weight, not as a threat, but as a statement of purpose, the kind men used to justify what came next. And Ethan nodded once, slow, acknowledging what had been said without agreeing to what it implied. And he answered just as quietly, then do not leave with nothing. And that made the rider pause, not because of the words themselves, but because of what they offered, something different from taking, something that did not require anyone to be forced into anything. And the other two riders shifted in their saddles, their eyes moving between Ethan and the woman, trying to understand what was happening, because this was not how these moments usually went. There was no raised voice, no quick move, no clear line of control, just a space that refused to collapse into something simple. And the wind moved again, carrying the faint sound of distant land stretching far beyond them. A reminder that none of this belonged to any one man, and the lead writer studied Ethan. Longer now, really studied him, not as a problem to solve, but as a man choosing something different in a place where that choice was rarely made. And after a long second, he let out a breath, slower than before, his shoulders easing just enough to show that the edge had softened, not gone, but no longer sharp, and he glanced once more at the woman, then back to Ethan, and for the first time since he arrived, his voice carried less certainty, more question. What do you expect us to do? And Ethan did not answer right away, because the truth was not something he could hand to them, not something he could decide for them. And that was the point. That was always the point. And when he finally spoke, his voice was steady, unchanged. Ask her. And the words settled into the space with a weight that none of them could ignore, because it shifted everything again, placing the next step where it had always belonged. With her, not with him, not with them. And for a moment no one moved. The kind of stillness that comes when something simple feels unfamiliar. And then the lead writer turned his head slightly, looking at the woman directly, not past her, not through her, but at her, and the silence stretched just long enough to make that moment matter. And Ethan felt it then, not tension, not fear, but something quieter, something like the beginning of a different way, fragile, uncertain, but real, and he remained where he was, not stepping forward, not stepping back, just holding that narrow ground as the choice shifted fully into her hands, and the men who had ridden in expecting one kind of ending now stood at the edge of another. They had not planned for the silence held, not empty, but full, stretched tight between men who were no longer certain what came next. And for the first time since they rode in, the lead rider did not look at Ethan when he spoke. He looked at her, directly, steady, as if testing whether he could hold that gaze without turning it into something else. And his voice came slower now, stripped of the edge it carried before. What do you want? And the question landed different than anything said so far, because it did not demand, it did not assume, it left space. And that space was something new, something fragile. And the woman did not answer right away, not because she did not have an answer, but because she understood the weight of it, understood that this moment, this narrow stretch of land under a lowering sun, had shifted into something that could not be rushed without breaking it. And she took a slow breath, the kind that settles a person into their own ground. And when she spoke, her voice carried the same calm it had from the beginning, but now there was something more beneath it, something that did not need to prove itself. I want you to leave. Simple, clear, no anger, no plea, just a statement of what was already true for her. And the wind moved again, brushing past them all as if carrying the words outward into the open land. And the riders did not react immediately, because they had expected something else, expected resistance they could push against, expected fear they could answer with control. But this was neither. This was a boundary spoken without force, and Ethan felt it settle deeper into the ground beneath his boots. The kind of statement that did not need to be defended because it was not built on anything that could be taken away. And the second rider shifted again, his posture less certain now, his earlier confidence worn thin by the steady refusal to meet him where he was used to standing. And he glanced at the lead rider, waiting, because this was no longer something he could decide alone. And the lead rider remained still, his eyes on her, weighing something that had not been part of his plan when he rode over that ridge. And Ethan did not move, did not speak, because this was not his moment to shape, not anymore. And he understood that clearly now. His role was not to lead, not to resolve, but to hold the space long enough for something different to take root. And the sun dipped lower, casting a warmer light across the land, softening the edges of everything without changing what was there. And in that light, the lead rider finally shifted, not forward, not with force, just a small movement in the saddle that signaled a decision forming. And he looked at his men briefly, a glance that carried more than words, then back at her. And when he spoke again, his voice was quieter than before, almost thoughtful. That is all. And she met it without hesitation. That is all. And something in that exchange settled the air in a way nothing else had. Not final, not absolute, but enough to hold, enough to allow a different ending to begin taking shape. And Ethan felt the tension ease just slightly, not gone, but no longer pressing against every breath. And the riders remained where they were for a second longer, as if giving themselves time to step back from what they had come to do. And then the lead rider turned his horse just a few degrees, not fully away, not yet, but enough to show that the path forward was no longer straight ahead, and Ethan stayed where he was, watching without watching, holding that same quiet ground. Because even now, even at the edge of something like resolution, he knew how fragile it was, how easily it could slip back into the old way if someone chose to ignore what had just been spoken. And behind him, the woman did not move closer, did not retreat. She simply stood, as she had from the beginning, steady, certain, and in that stillness, something had changed that none of them could quite name, but all of them could feel. The turn of the horse was small, almost nothing, just a shift of weight and direction. But out here small things carried meaning, and every man present felt it, the way the lead rider's choice moved through the others without a word, the way the second rider straightened slightly, as if letting go of something he had been holding on to since they crested the ridge, and the third man glanced once more at the woman, not with challenge this time, but with something closer to acknowledgement, quiet and unspoken, and Ethan remained where he was, not stepping forward to claim the moment, not stepping back to escape it, just standing in the place where everything had almost gone another way, and the wind softened again, carrying less dust now, as if the land itself had settled with them, and for a few seconds no one moved, not because they were unsure, but because they were allowing the decision to take shape fully before acting on it. And then the lead rider eased the reins just enough for his horse to shift its stance, turning a few more degrees away from the center of it all, and that was when Ethan knew it, not as a certainty shouted loud, but as something quieter, something that settled into the chest and stayed there. This was the moment that could have gone differently, the moment that usually did, and yet it had not. And he did not claim credit for it, did not assign it to himself or to her or to any single choice, because it was all of it together, the refusal, the stillness, the words that did not demand, the space that was held instead of taken. And the lead rider finally spoke again, his voice carrying none of the earlier edge, just a simple acknowledgement. We will go. And there was no hesitation in it now, no condition, just a statement that closed the path they had arrived on. And the other two men did not question it, did not resist, because something in them had shifted as well, something that made the old way feel heavier than before, and one by one their horses turned, slow, deliberate, the sound of leather and movement replacing the silence that had held them, and Ethan watched without staring, letting the moment pass without trying to hold on to it, because out here nothing stayed, not tension, not stillness, not even decisions like this. They all moved on with the wind, and behind him the woman remained still, not stepping closer, not offering thanks, not changing her stance in any visible way, and that, more than anything, told him what this had been, not something done for her, not something given, but something respected. And as the riders began to move away, their figures shifting against the fading light, the distance between them widening with each slow step of the horses, Ethan felt the weight lift, not completely, but enough to breathe easier, enough to know that this piece of land, for this moment, would not carry the kind of memory it so often did, and the sound of hooves softened as they moved farther out, blending into the open space beyond the ridge, until it became just another part of the land again, and still Ethan did not move, not right away, because he understood that leaving a moment like this required the same care as entering it, and he let the silence return, let it settle around them once more, and only then did he shift his weight slightly, not toward her, not away, just enough to show that whatever came next would not be forced, not by him, not by anyone. And the sun dipped lower still, painting the horizon in a quiet glow that did not ask for attention, and in that light, with the land stretching wide and open once again, the space between them remained, no longer filled with tension, but not empty either, holding something unspoken that neither of them had yet chosen to name. The land grew quiet again, not the kind of quiet that feels empty, but the kind that settles after something has been decided without needing to be spoken twice. And Ethan stood there a moment longer, his eyes following the last trace of dust drifting over the ridge where the riders had disappeared, until even that faded into the wide, open horizon, and only then did he let his shoulders ease, just slightly, just enough to release what he had been holding since the first sound of hooves reached them. and he did not turn immediately, because he understood that what remained behind him was not something to approach the way a man usually would, not something to close the distance on. And the wind moved again, softer now, carrying the faint scent of dry grass and sun-warmed earth, and it passed between them. Without resistance, the same space that had once held tension, now holding something quieter, something that did not need to be named to be real. And when Ethan finally shifted, it was only to take a small step back, not away from her, not toward her, just a step that returned the ground fully to her, as it had been from the beginning. And he spoke then, his voice low, steady, without expectation. They are gone, not as reassurance, not as a claim, just a simple truth placed gently into the air. And for a moment she did not respond, her gaze still resting on the ridge, as if watching something beyond what could be seen. And then she turned her head slightly, not fully toward him, just enough to acknowledge his presence without inviting it closer, and the silence stretched again. But this time it was different, no longer sharp, no longer waiting for something to break it. Just there, steady, like the land itself, and Ethan did not fill it, did not ask questions, did not offer explanations, because he knew that whatever needed to be said would come in its own time, if it needed to come at all. And he let his hand fall naturally at his side, no longer near the weight of his gun, no longer carrying the same meaning it had before, and the sun dipped lower still, casting long shadows that stretched across the ground, their shapes no longer facing each other, but running side by side across the dirt. And she took a slow breath, her shoulders rising and falling in a rhythm that matched the calm she had held from the start. And when she finally spoke, her voice was quieter than before, not guarded, not distant, just certain in a different way. You did not have to stay. And the words were not a question, not exactly, more like an observation offered into the space between them. And Ethan nodded once, a small movement that carried no weight beyond itself. And he answered just as simply, I know. And nothing more, no explanation, no reason given, because the reason was already there, in what had been done, not in what could be said. And she studied him then, fully this time, her eyes steady, searching not for answers, but for something she could recognize, something that matched what she had seen when he lowered his weapon. And for a brief moment the distance between them felt different, not smaller, not closed, but understood. And she turned slightly, her gaze moving back, across the land that stretched beyond them. And the wind lifted again, catching the edge of her clothing, carrying it softly before letting it fall. And when she spoke again, her voice carried the same quiet strength. This is where you leave. And it was not dismissal, not rejection, just another boundary, drawn as clearly as the first. And Ethan accepted it the same way, without resistance, without question, because he understood now that respect was not something proven once, it was something carried through every choice that followed. And he took a step back, then another, slow, deliberate, giving the space back fully, leaving it as he had found it. And when he turned, he did not look over his shoulder, did not check if she was watching, because that was not the point. And as he walked, the sound of his boots against the dry ground was steady, unhurried, fading gradually into the open land. And behind him, the space remained, untouched, unclaimed, exactly as it had been, except for one thing that could not be seen, only felt, something quiet and lasting, something that did not need to be spoken aloud to exist. And somewhere between the fading light and the steady rhythm of his steps, Ethan understood a truth that would stay with him long after this place was behind him. Out here, a man was not measured by how quickly he reached for his weapon, but by how willing he was to set it down and walk away without taking anything that was not freely given.